Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of hundreds available as free downloads, podcasts, or transcriptions. Our lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures to find teachings that suit you. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live and includes a free online classroom allowing listeners to see images, read related scriptures, and ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate, visit gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is a service of Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization. The lectures and radio broadcast have been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. To make a donation, visit gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.
In order to acquire spiritual experience, there are specific factors that we have to understand. Spiritual experience does not come randomly or by chance. Real spiritual experience is defined as comprehension, understanding, insight, wisdom. So in the context of Gnosis, we don't define spiritual experience as something limited only to fantastic tales that are written in books. We define spiritual experience as insight into oneself, or insight into how nature functions, insight into the nature of suffering, so that we can transform our lives and eliminate suffering. This is the true basis and true meaning and importance of spiritual experience. And as such, in this course, we've given, in the first few lectures, essential principles that establish a foundation from which anyone can acquire genuine spiritual experience, which is comprehension. In order to fulfill that, these principles have to be actualized in our lives. Not merely once or twice a week when we feel a little spiritual, but as a continual process of change. Not a change in superficial details like our wardrobe or places we go or music we listen to, but deep change in the most fundamental area of our life, which is in our consciousness. That is, what we pay attention to and how. This is where real change has a possibility of being stimulated. Superficial changes, like changing our wardrobe or changing our terrestrial habits, are very temporal. They come and go. And anyone who's had a little experience in life can look back on their life and see that they have adopted habits and changed habits again and again. But the fundamental problems of our lives have not changed. And this is evidence that real change is not produced through superficial changes, through superficial modifications of our lifestyle. Real change comes from deeper than that, and it's precisely in the consciousness. So to render that type of change and thereby acquire genuine spiritual experience, wisdom, we need to know the agent of that change. We need to be working with it all the time. Again, not just when we go to church, not just when we go to class, but all the time, constantly, continually, never stopping. And that agent of change is within us. It is not outside. It is not in any external behavior that we display. It is not in how we dress, how we talk. It is in what produces all of that. The change, possibility of change begins in the very spark that initiates experience of any kind. And that is consciousness. Consciousness. Many people think we need to change our way of thinking, or we need to change our way of acting, or we need to change our way of talking. These changes are superficial because they are at the top level or at the most visible levels of our behavior. And all of those factors in our life, speaking, talking, walking, dressing, are driven by something deeper, which is consciousness. The real potential for change is in changing consciousness, how it works, how we use it. So we need to know what that is and how it works in us. In that context, we can then begin to understand what spirituality really is, what religion really is, what yoga is, what tantra is. These sciences are not belief systems or theories that we lay as a blanket over our current way of life. They aren't a vesture or an outfit that we put on to look special. Instead, they are a way of changing perception. And this point can't be emphasized enough. There are many people who claim to be Gnostics or Buddhists or Tantrics or yogis, but they merely wear the theories and beliefs like a jacket. They just put it on over their stale habits, and they continue to behave in the same way that they've always behaved. And they can speak beautifully and act like saints, but they aren't. They aren't beautiful and they aren't saints because they continue to behave in the ways they always have, and they continue to suffer. Let us not fall into that trap, that mistake of making our religion or spirituality merely another kind of personality, a mask. Real Tantra, real Gnosis, is a change in perception. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. And this is illustrative of the precise point. We are always concerned with outward appearances. And our attention is very much absorbed in the outward phenomena. And this is our problem. We have forgotten that the outward phenomena only exists and is perceptible because of the inner phenomena. We have forgotten that, and we continually forget it. Our attention is completely absorbed in external events. It is identified. And by external in this context, I'm not talking merely about physical matter. I'm talking about all phenomena external to the being, to the real self. Our attention, our consciousness, has become fully absorbed in external things that have no basis in reality. This is what has to change in us. So consciousness is the major element that we need to comprehend in order to have any spiritual life. Consciousness. Most of us could barely begin to explain what this word means, even as a theory. And it would be much more difficult for most of us to explain what it means in practical terms, as what we experience. And the shocking truth is that consciousness is the basis of life. It is what gives us the capacity to be alive and to perceive. And that is the root characteristic of consciousness, perception. Consciousness is the ability to perceive. Not merely through the five senses that we have physically, but in every level. This is why spiritually, in context of religion, we always say consciousness is light, but not physical light. Spiritual light. It is the light of the Ein Sof that descends and crystallizes in different levels of matter and energy until finally arriving in this physical world, irradiating outwards from within us and giving us life, the ability to perceive. But consciousness, as a form of light, is not a wave, it is not a particle, it is not matter or energy like any other matter or energy. It is distinct, it is different. It has characteristics similar to other energies in nature. And that is, it can polarize. It has a very wide, even infinite range of potential. So just like physical light has a wavelength, a vibration, a characteristic in terms of color, in terms of its magnetism, so does the consciousness that gives us existence. It has color. It has vibration. It has a wavelength. In other words, it vibrates according to laws. The consciousness is light, spiritual light. From the heights of the Ein Sof, the Absolute, that light is perfect and pure. It is only modified by one law when it comes into manifestation, and that is the law of Christ, the ultimate law. And as it descends, it begins to modify and create into 3 laws, into 6 laws, into 12 laws, into 24 laws, and finally into 48. All of those octave notes, the notes of the octave, are very organized and flow according to very specific patterns in nature. All of this is mystery to us because when that consciousness, that light, finally emerges through the 48 laws, which relate to physical matter and this physical body, that light becomes very modified. Here now we experience consciousness, but very modified. In other words, if you imagined the brightest light that you can imagine and put 48 filters in front of it, 48 prisms, that's how modified that light becomes when it reaches physical matter. In other words, it's very dense. It's very dispersed. It's beautiful. It's what's created the physical world. It's what's created the physical body. But it isn't unified. What's more, when we look into our own mind, we can see that that light is modified even more. When we look into our mind, we see all the characteristics of our own psychology. Pride, anger, lust, envy, jealousy, fear, craving. All of the different psychological characteristics that surge in our mind stream. Every one of them is a crystallization of that light that when passing through the laws of nature became crystallized because of our mistake. Because instead of knowing how to use that light consciousness properly, we modified it with desire. And as such, that light becomes crystallized, made more dense, trapped in additional laws, all because of a single law, karma, the law of cause and effect. From that context, we can then imagine in our minds, with our imagination, many levels descending. At the very top, in our imaginary scale, we see the pure light of the Ein Sof, which is perfect. And as that light descends as the ray of creation, elaborating all of the superior levels of our being, we can imagine our spirit and our soul. And when that light descends further into physical matter, and we take a body, and we begin interacting with matter and energy physically, we transform that light according to how we behave. That is, when we behave selfishly, when we behave with anger, when we behave with lust. That light that should have been pure becomes caught in the karma of those behaviors, and that light becomes modified. It becomes a crystal. If you've ever seen a crystal, it's a mineral. It is the hardening of crystalline or of mineral elements that form certain shapes and patterns, but which refract light. And that's precisely what the ego does in us. It refracts light. It bends light. This is why when we become angry, we only see through the filter the refraction of that anger. And everything we see, everything we hear, everything we think is modified by that anger. We interpret everything according to that anger, and we express everything according to that anger. Reflect in your own experience and look at this. When we feel a surge of lust, the same thing happens. Lust filters our perception. Everything we see, taste, sense, hear, feel, and want is modified by that crystalline structure in our mind. Because that filter has modified that light. And as such, we continue to deepen the mistake. So that the energy, the light that's flowing through us and through that filter becomes further modified. This is why the ancient laws of Manu state a desire can only grow if it's fed. The more we feed it, the stronger it gets. And this is true of any ego. Anger, lust, pride, envy, gluttony, greed, laziness. All of them are strengthened through our behaviors. Not just physically, but psychologically. Here is the key point to understanding this function in nature. Observe yourself. Notice that when some desire, a fear, an envy, something that we want or don't want is strong in us, it captures our attention. It holds our attention. It won't let us go. When we become very irritated with someone, even if we're not around that person, if some event has happened that has made us angry, we will be continually feeling that anger, even for days or weeks. Feeling the anger, thinking about the anger, feeling tense and stressed. So all three brains are disturbed. That is how strong the laws are that manage anger. And that anger, that crystal, is trapping our light. And the longer that we continue to sit and be enveloped in that sensation of anger, the stronger it becomes. What's worse is, this is a form of identification. We use this word in Gnosis, in Gnostic psychology, a lot. Identification. We need to understand with precision what it means. In the first part of that term, you see identity. So then the meaning becomes very obvious. We are finding our identity in that experience, in that emotion, in that thought, in that sensation. When we become very angry, we are identified with our anger, meaning that anger becomes our identity, our I. That anger has become a vampire, a tick, a leech that is sucking up the light, the consciousness, the energy that's flowing through us. And it's using that energy to feed itself, to make itself fatter, to give itself more power. This is the difficulty. Identification. When we become identified, we renounce, we give up our true connection with God. Identification, then, is a state of psychological sleep. It is a state in which the consciousness has become hypnotized. The consciousness has become trapped, caught by a desire. Within our mind, we have millions of examples of these types of desires. Millions. Each of us has our own. So the science of Gnosis, yoga, religion, tantra, is learning, it teaches us how to change our perception so that we can break the chain of identification. It's a continual effort from moment to moment. It cannot be something that we just do once a week or on retreat once a year. To break identification requires incredible energy. And this is why we need to save energy. It requires incredible endurance, consistency, discipline, willpower, concentration. In other words, we have to be trained. Don't think that because you've read some books or gone to some classes that you all of a sudden know how to do it. If any of us knew how to do it, we would not be suffering. We would not be trapped in our karma. We'd be escaping it. To know how to do it is not a matter of thinking or believing. It is a matter of perceiving in a different way. Using perception in a different way. The stages of training we've been explaining in this course and throughout all the books and lectures we've given. In the Hindu tradition, the author Patanjali outlined these steps according to his perspective. His outline expresses the same principles that you find in any other training of this type. Whether it's Chinese or Tibetan or Aztec, they all express the same principles. According to Patanjali, the very first step for this training is ethics, which in Sanskrit is yana and niyama. Without ethics, there can be no spiritual progress. These ethics are not the morals of the world. They are the ethics of the spirit. They are to do what God wants us to do, what our inner Buddha directs us to do. Based upon that, we can then begin to practice meditation. When our ethics are getting strong, then our posture likewise becomes strong. When our ethics are weak, then we can't sit still. When we are breaking our ethical rules, when we commit infractions against our own being, our own Buddha, this puts into motion cycles of energy, karma, in us, psychologically and physically, which results in the body being unable to relax. If we're stressed all the time, if we're unable to relax and sit still and keep a good posture, we need to work on ethics. We need to work on taming our mind and working on our behaviors. After our posture or asana, we work with pranayama. And as we explained in the third lecture in this course, pranayama is not merely a breathing exercise. It is not limited to that. Pranayama means to harness the wind energy, which in Tibetan is called lung. And that energy runs through us continually, and we use it according to our will, continually. Right now, everyone here is using prana. The question is, how are we using it? When we use our prana, our energy, from moment to moment, consciously, that is pranayama in its ultimate synthesis. We also have exercises where we sit and focus on harnessing energy, and we call those pranayama. But at the highest level, pranayama is a continual effort. Then we learn practices to steady the mind, to steady the consciousness, to have a serene mind, or shamatha, which in Tibetan is called shine. This is to have equanimity psychologically. This type of equanimity, or in Sanskrit is called pratyahara, cannot be had if our vital, emotional, and mental energies are out of balance. If our mind is surging with lust, if our body is surging with stress, we cannot have equanimity in the mind. The mind will be surging. So in order to have a serene mind, or pratyahara, we need to harness energy and stabilize it with pranayama. But in order to have pranayama, to stabilize and harmonize energy, to do that, we need to have a strong posture, a relaxed body. Tension in the body impedes the flow of energy in the body and in the nadis. And in order to have that relaxed posture, we must have ethics. You see these steps? You can't skip any. We need all of them. Once the mind is reaching serenity, we can start to develop and experience true concentration. Real concentration is called dharana in Sanskrit. Real concentration is undistracted. It is the ability to place attention and not waver for anything. Any of us can do that. But we can't do that if during the day we're allowing our mind to be constantly distracted. If our attention is always getting pulled this way and that by the surging desires inside of us and outside of us. Real concentration emerges in us once these other levels have been established in our life. Pratyahara, pranayama, asana, and yama niyama. All of these have to be established first. Once concentration built upon those foundations begins to be our reality, we can move to the next stage and experience dhyana. In Sanskrit, this word dhyana, strictly translated, means meditation. But it doesn't mean sitting around doing om or chanting mantras. It means meditation in the real sense of the word. In English, the word meditation has been completely ruined. People in English have no concept of what meditation really means. They think it's sitting around and spacing out, daydreaming, fantasizing about things, or just sitting there with your fingers curled up like you're from Asia. That's not meditation. A better word in English is absorption. That's a better translation of dhyana. That's what we're going to talk about in the lecture today. Once we've established the ability to have absorption, which is real meditation, actual meditation, then can come the final fruit, which is samadhi. Samadhi is very difficult to translate in English. Some people translate it as ecstasy. And unfortunately, because of the nature of our mind, we hear that word and we think of sex. So we think samadhi must be better than sex. It must be some incredible sensation, a whole body orgasm, something like that. So this is what people think. They're wrong. Completely wrong. Because they are identified with desire. The mind, the consciousness has become so modified by desire that we see everything through desire. This is why we study the tree of life. This chart or graph or octave that I had you imagine of the many levels of density of matter and energy are here on the tree of life. The very heights we have the Ein Sof. And as we move downwards following the ray of creation, matter and energy become more dense. The 10th Sephiroth is Malkut, which represents the physical world or the physical body. This is the point of balance between the heavens and the hells. How energy is modified in Malkut determines our future, determines our present, and determined our past. When the energy moves through us, we have life. We're all alive, breathing, seeing, hearing, feeling, because we have the light of consciousness flowing through us. Very modified, but it is there. Become aware now of your 5 senses. How often in your lifetime have you been aware, conscious of your eyes that see? How often in your life have you been conscious of your ears that hear? Of your skin that transmits touch? Of your nose that transmits scent? And of your tongue that transmits taste? It's very rare for us to be cognizant of these senses, and yet we depend upon them from instant to instant. The sad truth is, we have become hypnotized by them, completely identified with the phenomena that vibrate through our senses. So let's understand something really important here. Imagine inside of yourself. Look inside. Your body, your physical body, feel it. It has a given range of function, range of action. We can call it a field. Not a field of wheat, but a field of energy and matter. It extends out a certain distance. And within that field, we have all the different sensations that we are currently experiencing. But how are we experiencing them? How does it happen? What happens in us? Why are we experiencing it? And is there another way? Now, as you're feeling and sensing your body, become aware that right now you're experiencing many sensations. Most obviously, sound. You're putting attention in the sense of sound to listen to the explanation. And that energy of sound is passing along a conduit, a circuit, flowing into you. Everyone can see that, right? You can experience that. We're never cognizant of it. This is precisely the beginning of suffering. It's also the beginning of the freedom from suffering. Every form of energy that we encounter is a transformation. The energy that passes into us through touch, through taste, through scent, through the hearing, and through the eyes is an energy that passes along a circuit and is transformed. But it is transformed according to how we receive it. If you've studied these courses for a while, you know that the word Kabbalah comes from the Hebrew word kabel, which means to receive. And you know that the Master Samael Aun Weor taught us that there are two kinds of people who study Kabbalah: white magicians and black magicians. The black magicians study everything with the intellect. They memorize. They adopt a lot of theories and beliefs. They don't experience. They don't receive intuitively. The white magicians receive intuitively, that is, consciously, without the need for memorization, but instead, through cognizance, they come to know. But you see, that Kabbalah that they study is not a chart or a book or a diagram. It is themselves. We are the tree of life. To become a white magician, an intuitive Kabbalist, means that one constantly, cognizantly observes the tree of life. That tree of life is ourselves. It isn't outside. What that means is that every energy that passes into or out of Malkut, our body, has to pass in or out consciously, not mechanically. But none of us have done that yet. Everything that passes in and out of us passes in and out through identification. When the body gets hungry, what happens? We start to feel stress. Subtle stress, maybe, but that stress of hunger. The urgency to eat. The body is telling us, food. What happens in the mind? We become agitated. We start to imagine food, to think about food, to figure out a plan to get food. We build images in the mind. We build a longing in the heart. We start to crave what we want. And if we know we can't get that, or it's unlikely, we start to feel pain. Oh, I've got to eat my grandma's cooking again. So we're stuck craving and aversion. Now, we all need to eat to be alive. But we make of it a religion. We make of it a desire, a false religion. In other words, instead of the religare, the union with the innermost, which is real religion, we are performing a religare, or a union, with the projections of our mind, desire. That thing that is so natural in every living thing, which is to eat, becomes in us an obsession, an identification. We want our food according to our taste on our schedule. And if we don't get it, there are a lot of problems. We get grumpy, we start arguing, fighting, we lash out. All kinds of psychological repercussions, and we're all different. But we do this with every area of our life. We need clothes. Many people make a religion of clothes. An obsession, an identification. We need shelter. We also need impressions. We need to take in information. You see, the consciousness that's flowing through us, it doesn't go one way. This is another great misconception that we have. We think whatever happens inside of us is a closed room, private. It isn't. There is a law of energy, a law of nature that has different names in different traditions, but that in its synthesis explains simply this. Any energy that meets another energy, there will always be an exchange of forces. Always. Inevitable. Unavoidable. There will always be an exchange. In modern forensic science, for example, this is the whole success of forensic science, is that knowledge. Anytime two people meet, there is always an exchange of energy or matter or both. But what's important for us about this spiritually is that any time our Malkut encounters any phenomenon, there is an exchange of forces. Remember a moment ago I had you pay attention to hearing. Did you realize that your hearing is reaching out, right? You're listening. You've got attention going outwards, trying to grasp the meaning of what I'm saying. But realize that in that reaching out, you're pulling in. The energy is going two ways. As you are listening, data is flowing in, information, energy. This happens with all five senses. Whenever you touch something, whenever you taste something, you reach out to grab that impression and you pull information back. This is how we live. This is the basis of life. The basis of living is that exchange of information. The problem is we do it without consciousness. What happens then, we are not cognizant of that exchange. We are asleep. We don't know what happens. We have no awareness. That means we don't know what we're doing when we take in information. And we are constantly taking in information, whether we want it or not. Constantly taking in data, information, in the form of sensations. So if we imagine this field of the body, inside, in the center or core, is that light of Ein Sof. And as it flows in us, it flows outwards and makes all the different dense levels. The Trinity, the monad, the soul, the mental body, the astral body, and then finally the vital and physical bodies. That light projects out through us. Sensations are encountered. When that light strikes any phenomenon along that path, it produces sensations. In other words, when you see something, there's energy of consciousness moving into you through your eyes, striking something. There's a transformation there immediately. Information is brought back through your eyes, to your brain, to your mind, to your soul. We are not cognizant of that. Because we're not cognizant of it, we don't know what's happening. In other words, we don't have gnosis, knowledge. This is the whole point of existence, is for that light to express, to gather knowledge, and to go back with that knowledge. To understand the relationship between consciousness and existence. It's precisely in this gateway of the senses. This is why all the ancient scriptures state, restrain the senses. conquer them, control them, be cognizant of them. And it's precisely in the door of the senses that we find the doorway to hell and the doorway to heaven. When we are asleep, when we are identified, our attention goes to that object and is hypnotized. Becomes fascinated by the vibration of that sensation. Reflect in your own life. Look at yourself and see what sensations hypnotize you, cause you to forget your self-awareness. If you're sincere, you'll find many. And most of them don't even seem significant. We lose our awareness because we see an attractive person, or because we get irritated, or because we get a new idea, or because we want attention, or we don't want attention. We lose awareness. And our body begins to go through all its motions mechanically, while our psyche is distracted. What's interesting about this is that you see that sensation externally that hypnotizes us is not really to blame. It isn't the fault of external phenomena that this happens. It's the fault of an internal phenomenon about which we have even less cognizance than the transformation that happens externally. Because you see, anything that we relate to externally, that relationship is not determined by the external object. The relationship is determined by our state of mind, by what's inside of us. For example, I can see a hot dog and I don't care. But I have a friend who can see a hot dog and he starts to salivate. The reaction there is not caused by the external phenomenon. It's caused by the mind. Do you grasp the point there? It is not the physical sensation that is to blame. It is not the fault of the physical sensation. It is a psychological sensation that hypnotizes us. This is why when we talk about renunciation, we don't care so much about the physical aspect, whether you have money or don't, whether you live in a palace or a cardboard box. It really is irrelevant. What matters is your psychological relationship with those elements. If your mind is attached, a beggar can be even as attached to his cardboard box as a wealthy man is to his house. Because what's vital there is the psychological relationship, the psychological sensations. In both cases, the identification is happening in the mind. Identification is the polar opposite of absorption. In this course, we've been talking about how to meditate, how to reach spiritual experience. Do you want to know why we cannot? Because we're identified all the time. Dhyana, proper absorption in meditation, is impossible if we let our mind be identified all the time with external and internal sensations. Now let's examine that a little bit. All of us can readily understand external sensations. We understand that we have eyes to see, so that's how we see. And likewise for the other senses, physically. But let's posit a question. If we only have those 5 physical senses, then how is it that you can visualize a carrot? With what sense can you imagine a president, your mother, your childhood? How do you remember going swimming, what it felt like? You're remembering sensations, and you're perceiving sensations, but not with your 5 physical senses. How is it that you daydream? With what sense? When you become distracted and your mind starts to fly away like a little bird, and you're fantasizing and daydreaming, how are you sensing that? No one can deny that we can sense our thoughts. But with what sense? No one can deny that we can sense our emotions. But how? With what sense do we sense them? Now, materialists would say we sense thoughts with the brain and we sense emotions with the heart. There's a little bit of truth in that, because those physical bodies, the heart and brain, transmit sensation. They do. But those of us who've had some spiritual experience would then say, well, then what about all the things that I sensed when I was out of my body? What about my dreams? What about my astral experiences? What about my nightmares? How do you sense those things? The answer is simple and complicated. Simple and complicated because we don't have merely a physical body, we have internal bodies. And those internal bodies also have the senses the physical body has. They see, taste, touch, taste, hear. When you're in your astral body, you can taste, you can see, you can hear, you can feel. But more than that, you can escape all of your bodies and experience sensation. Because what transmits sensation is consciousness. The consciousness can use different vehicles according to the need, according to the level of nature, in order to transmit sensation. But it does it according to laws. What this means for us as people who are aspiring to have genuine spiritual experience is that spiritual experience can be had anywhere, anytime, if we know how to modify and manage consciousness. This is why we've stated in other lectures that a genuine master can have a samadhi even in the physical body while it's active, because they have trained themselves to not become identified. And they use the consciousness free of modification. All the egos, all the I's, are modifications. When we look at how these laws become more dense in nature, we described how physical matter is sustained by 48 laws. But when the energy that's passing through the physical body is corrupted by desire and thereby acquires karma, those laws are multiplied according to the gravity of the mistake. Fornication, anger, resentment, lust, pride, envy. All of these psychological phenomena transform and crystallize energy in our mind as egos, as I's. And those are all modified by laws. This is why we have such a hard time extracting ourselves when an ego is strong, when a desire is strong, when we become afraid, when we become enraged, when we're feeling a lot of pride, when we're feeling a lot of lust. It's very difficult because there are a lot of laws. And because those egos are very dense and they trap our consciousness. That's a lot of laws. we are identified, when we are identified, we are, in turn, under the power of these laws. If you really analyze this, you should become really concerned. Here's the reason. Heaven, the superior worlds, what in Buddhism is called nirvana, is modified by very few laws. That's why it's such a beautiful experience, to experience heaven or nirvana. Because in those states, your consciousness is not modified by so many laws, but by less. And we feel that freedom, that joy, that ecstasy. The ecstasy of samadhi is that. It is when the consciousness becomes free of the ego. It is the ecstasy of the soul. It is a sensation in the soul, in the psyche, even in the spirit. But it isn't an orgasm or anything like it. There's no comparison. The sensations that we experience physically, like orgasm, are brute sensations. Very superficial and crude and very temporary. They have a brief peak and they pass away, and they always have consequences that we ignore. But the ecstasies of the soul are lasting, and they change you. The ecstasies of the soul, or what we would call samadhi, are experiences of the consciousness out of the ego. Free of ego. Those experiences are incredibly beautiful, but they are not physical. They are emotional. They are psychological, but they are not theories or beliefs. They are cognizance. They are a vibration of consciousness that can't be explained with words. When we're identified, we are absorbed in the ego, in experiencing the sensations of the ego. When we are identified with anger, really angry, observe that sensation. Anger is a form of suffering. Yet we become so habituated to it. We become addicted. We become accustomed to it. It becomes our way of doing things. We even become proud of it. There are many people who are proud of being angry. And they enjoy the sensations of pride and the sensations of anger. In other words, they love their cage. And they love to repeat those sensations as much as they can. This is the clue. Identification loves to repeat. Identification loves to repeat itself. When we feel those sensations of anger or lust, when we feel like someone's praising us and it makes our ego feel so good, we want more praise. We want to do again what got that praise for us, so we can feel that sensation of praise again. In other words, it's a cycle. Every ego is a cycle. In other words, every ego is samsara. The word samsara means cyclical suffering. And every ego is that. We're all trapped in the wheel of samsara. We talk about that as it is this world. It is also the worlds of hell. But those worlds only exist because of our own inner wheel of samsara, which is our own mind, that loves to repeat sensations and ignore the consequences. We don't care if our anger hurts people. We don't care. We want revenge. We want justice, according to that ego. We don't care if our pride hurts people. We don't care if our envy hurts people, if our gossip hurts people. We don't care. We love the sensations of gossiping, of criticizing, of blaming. We love the sensations of lust. We don't care if it hurts others. It does. So in all of these modifications of consciousness that exist in our subconscious, unconscious, and infraconscious levels are cycles of suffering that we're trapped in because we're identified. This is why when we lay down to sleep, and we pass out, and we lose consciousness, the whole night we dream of the same things we've always dreamed of, repeating again and again. And why in our daily lives we keep repeating the same situations again and again. Because of these cycles of the ego. To change this, we have to change how we pay attention. Now, in each moment. To start transforming how we receive information. To transform impressions. This is how we acquire the ability to experience dhyana. Real meditation. Remember, it's built on those other stages. We have to have ethics. We have to have relaxation. We have to have harnessing of the winds. We have to have a serene mind. We have to have concentration. And once all of those preliminaries have been established, not only once a week, but in our daily life, then dhyana becomes a real possibility. Dhyana is absorption. It is a form of nirvana. The Sanskrit word nirvana means cessation. But cessation of what? Cessation of that cycle. Cessation of identification. You see, in Hinduism and Buddhism, samsara and nirvana represent these two polar extremes, heaven and hell, in Christian terms or Islamic terms. Heaven and hell are places, but what concerns us most is the psychology of them, which is in us. Heaven and hell is right now. What are we experiencing? What are we experiencing? The great tantric master who brought Tantra to Tibet said very clearly the difference between nirvana and samsara is attention. Now, people who are materialists, who read everything literally, would say, what? Nirvana is heaven and samsara is hell. How can the difference be attention? Because they don't understand Tantra. The difference is attention in oneself, cognizance. When we have self-cognizance, we are transforming energy in a different way. Let's explain what that means. In the examples that I was giving you of the consciousness flowing through us like a light and striking a sensation and returning energy, returning information, that is what has to be cognizant. The first part of that is willpower. The willpower to be attentive, to be present, to be here and now. All the time. That here and now is not outside of your body. It is not getting distracted in counting how many bricks are on the wall, or checking the position of all the chairs, and constantly being outside looking at physical things. That is not how it works. Samael Aun Weor taught it very clearly in Revolutionary Psychology. We need a division of attention. That division is to be constantly aware of what is outside and what is inside. That division is between observer and observed. When I say outside and inside in this case, I mean outside of consciousness. Because that outside could be in the internal worlds also. That division has confused some students because in the previous lecture I was telling you there should be no separation. And that's why I'm giving you this lecture today, so you can understand what this means. There is no contradiction. Don't get caught in the terminology. Capture the synthesis of it. These two tarot cards illustrate what I'm talking about. The Magician is the first card of the tarot. The Magician is our being. The Magician represents willpower. That's why he stands. He is attentive. Always watchful. That willpower has many levels of meaning, but for us today it means self-cognizance, self-observation, self-remembering, never forgetting oneself, mindfulness, watchfulness, all those terms that you've always heard, vigilance. It means that. To be constantly watching one's consciousness. This is cognizance of oneself. It's simply to be aware. It isn't complicated. Don't let your mind make it into something complicated and a big deal. It's very simple. Look at how you pay attention. Be aware of how you pay attention. That's all there is to it. Be aware of how your attention is moving. Be aware of what you pay attention to. Be aware of what's happening in your three brains, in your mind. That is all that division means. To be cognizant of oneself, no matter what's happening. That self-cognizance, that observation, is the entire basis of religion. It is what unites us to the innermost. If you forget God, you can't unite with God. Our consciousness comes from God. It comes from our inner Buddha. And by remembering that, by being cognizant of that stream of energy, we connect to it. We feel it. You may not feel it now, but you will. As it strengthens in you, as you practice meditation, as you harness energy, as you relax, and these preliminaries all become more familiar to you and expressed in you, you will start to experience something called the sensation of contemplation. It is not a physical sensation. It is not emotional. It is not mental. It is in the consciousness. It is a sensation of active consciousness that is cognizant of itself, that is aware of itself. This sensation of contemplation begins to be experienced in pratyahara. It becomes more stable with dharana, and it becomes expressed in dhyana. It becomes fully activated in samadhi. It's something that you have to experience to understand. So in the first few lectures, we've been giving you all the information of these first 5 or 6 lectures is all about the magician. It's all about harnessing energy, harnessing attention with willpower, learning to concentrate, learning to relax, learning to pay attention. But none of that is enough. Basically, everything we've explained so far is the same thing you'll get in the first 2 levels of any spiritual training, Sutrayana and Mahayana. We've talked about some of the tantric aspects. But in reality, Raja Yoga, Patanjali's yoga, all the Sutrayana and Mahayana traditions, even including the Vipassana traditions that are popular in some countries, basically they all teach you essentially this: ethics, relaxation, concentration. That's it. That's all good. And you can experience dhyana to some level with that. That's why in those traditions, they use the word dhyana, and they use the word jhana, and they use the word chan, zen, samden. All these sound the same, right? Because they all talk about the same thing. Zen, chan, jhana, samden are all names from different languages for the same state of consciousness, which is dhyana. That state is a state of meditation or absorption. So some traditions will use the word absorption. What does it mean? In the same way that we become really absorbed in a movie, but we forget ourselves, in real dhyana, you become very absorbed, but you remember yourself. They are the opposite. Identification is the negative aspect of dhyana. Dhyana itself is cognizant absorption. It is a state of consciousness in which we become fully absorbed, but self-aware. There are many types of dhyana, many terms, many structures, many teachings that explain dhyana. The key to understand is this: it is beyond mere concentration. It is a type of experience, spiritual experience, not yet samadhi, but a very profound absorption, a state of consciousness in which we are very aware, very focused, perceiving. And this is the key. Many of the introductory level schools talk about jhanas, states of concentration, but they exclude perception. They exclude imagery. They exclude sound. They don't want you to visualize. They don't want you to see anything. And so they are cutting off their own arms and legs. They have not received the third level of training, Tantra. Because to really experience and establish dhyana, you need the second aspect of meditation. Not just shamatha and concentration, what the Master Samael called willpower, but you also need imagination, which is represented in this second card, the priestess. The high priestess here is feminine, receptive. You see these two polarities? Masculine, projective, feminine, receptive. The man stands, attentive. The woman sits, receiving. These are the two wings of meditation. In Tantric Buddhism, they're called shamatha and vipassana. In Mahayana Buddhism, they have different terms to describe the same thing. In Hinayana, they don't use it. In Buddhism, or in Gnosticism, we talk about it quite simply: willpower and imagination. Stated simply, once you've learned to concentrate, to relax, to have those preliminaries established so that you're reaching pratyahara and then dharana, you have good concentration, then you need to start using imagination. Visualizing. This is the great teaching that comes through Tantra. Everybody thinks it's sexuality. That's part of it. But the real difference in Tantra, the third level of instruction to the other schools, is that it fully embraces and teaches visualization. It is the core meditation practice, visualization. It's what takes the focused power of the preliminary stages and actualizes it. It unites these two aspects into one. Shamatha, vipassana become one. When that union between the two aspects is balanced, samadhi is the result. In practical terms, what this means for us as meditators, when you've established the preliminaries and you're sitting in meditation and you've got good concentration, as soon as you start visualizing, you can enter samadhi easily, at will, anytime. And a great master can do that even while their physical body is active. Just by opening their sense of visualization. And it is a sense. In us, it's weak. In us, our power of visualization is very like a baby, not developed. But it has an infinite capacity to be developed. This is why in this tradition we teach visualization. And the first and most important exercise we teach for that is retrospection. It is a visualization practice that we do every day. It also has an important psychological component. But its value is precisely in that it not only teaches us psychologically, it teaches us to use visualization. So now you can ask yourself again, how is it that I sense what I imagine? If I tell you to imagine a fire truck, you can visualize it, even with your eyes open, right? Everybody can sort of see an image of a fire truck. That power is the power of visualization. It is not with your physical eyes. Remember that when you sit to meditate. Many people, when they sit to meditate, close their eyes and start trying to see with their physical eyes. You will waste years like that. Years. It isn't with your physical eyes that you visualize. Your physical eyes should just be totally relaxed. So a good exercise when you're beginning your meditation is, even with your eyes open, start doing simple visualizations. Start just remembering some simple things. Visualize a banana. Visualize your house. Visualize your altar. Visualize your mother. And just so you get that sense of, oh yeah, this is where I visualize. It's up here. It's not with my eyes. And when you start doing that, then close your eyes and start your retrospection. You will go a lot faster in understanding how to do this practice. A lot faster. So the visualization is really important. Here's what we need to have happen. Normally, when we close our eyes and images start to appear, we become identified immediately, right? We do it every night when we lay down to go to sleep. We lay down, we start remembering work, we start thinking about tomorrow, we start imagining breakfast, and immediately we start dreaming. Not dreaming consciously, but identified with the images. And so we get sucked into sleep mechanically, unconsciously. The same thing happens when we sit to meditate. Anyone who's tried to learn meditation has experienced when they are sitting relaxing, and as soon as images start to come, they get distracted and they start dreaming. And they lose cognizance of themselves. This is the gateway where we have to start training ourselves to be cognizant of those images. And this is the value of retrospection. It trains us to be cognizant of the images that appear. It takes patience and a lot of relaxation and a lot of attentiveness to develop the skill. What will happen, though, is as you become more mindful, meaning that your capacity to remember what you're doing is widening. You're able to remember that you're meditating for longer. You're able to be cognizant of yourself as you fall asleep longer. Then when those images appear, you don't react with surprise or by being identified. Instead, you start to see them and say, oh yeah, I see this, I see that. And you're able to start maintaining cognizance. The ability to do that is developed during the day through your self-observation, through your observance of your mind during the day. If you're struggling to develop this ability in meditation, or when you're doing your dream yoga, do it more during the day. Observe the images that come in your mind. Watch those images. Be cognizant of the images and sounds that you hear in your mind. Has anyone here ever had a song playing over and over and over in your head and you can't get it out? Do you know how it got there? Because you were asleep. Has anyone had scenes from a movie or a TV show that keep coming in your mind? Do you know how it got there? You were asleep when you watched it. Your mind has been programmed with that information. You were unconscious. Become conscious of everything you see outside. Become conscious of everything you see inside. Through that training, the doorway to samadhi opens easily. That doorway is dhyana, absorption. Properly defined, dhyana means the ability to perceive images without distraction. to be absorbed, fully attentive in what you see, to not get sucked into it and be identified, and not to be shocked out of it by fear, but to be right there watching. That's dhyana. The Tibetan version of the word, which is samden something, I can't remember the second part, means to be established. And it's the 5th paramita of the 6 paramitas. That means that dhyana is the 5th paramita of the 6. The 6th is prana, which is ultimate knowledge. Dhyana is the foundation where we become established, samden, to reach prana, ultimate knowledge. This means that in your meditation practice, you need the ability to sit, to have your visualization open, where you see images, and you are able to stay there and watch. That's how we reach comprehension. Wisdom, prana, knowledge. Once again, that is impossible if we're always identified. We have to break our identification, continually becoming aware of ourselves in order to experience it. That's what this image is showing. This yogi that we've looked at in pretty much every class has all the preliminaries established. He has a very relaxed posture. He's harnessed energy. He's using mantras to concentrate. He has his prana flowing through his pineal gland in his head, flowing upwards, illuminating his mantra. And from that emerges the energy of the ethers. Those ethers, related to the vital body, is what provides him the window of clairvoyance. That's how he's able to see this temple. And he's sitting here serenely observing. This picture is a state of dhyana. It's showing that. So to comprehend this, we need to know the 5 types of imagination. Imagination is a common English word for a fancy word called clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is a deceptive term that's been invented by some occultists a couple centuries ago and since then misused to mislead people. We all have clairvoyance. In other words, we all have imagination. But there are 5 fundamental types. A Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, Padmasambhava, Samael and Vior, these great masters, by working on themselves, have established supraconscious imagination. This is the ability to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously without any filter. In other words, they see reality. But only very elevated beings reach that degree of imagination or clairvoyance. Now, when we say the word imagination, in English, we all think it's something made up or fake. It is not. Any image that is produced in your mind is a reflection of something. You see, your mind is a mirror. That's all it is, a mirror. Even if you try to invent something in your mind, to try to make up something, you can't. Because everything that you make up can only reflect things that you've already seen. It sounds weird, but test it. Anything that you try to imagine is merely a reflection of something you've already seen. You might combine different parts. You might put things together in a little bit different way, but you can't invent anything totally new because you're not God. Only God can do that. Thus, everything we see in our imagination is merely reflections of things we've already seen, but slightly changed or modified, different color, different coat of paint, but the same entities. And this is why in occultism it's stated, no man can see that which he does not know. Sounds contradictory, but it's a great truth. So imagination is merely a reflection, a mirror. It isn't made up. But what we see depends on our mirror. In us, what we see in our imagination is usually the reflection of our own degenerated mind. Usually when we close our eyes and imagine, we only see images related to our lust and anger and pride and envy and all the other garbage that we carry around. It's very difficult for us to visualize God, to visualize a divinity, to imagine that, because we've scarcely seen it. And what we've seen of it, we've corrupted too. We have all these images and ideas of God that have nothing to do with the truth. The second type of imagination is conscious. Conscious imagination is only possessed by those who are awake in the internal worlds. That means to see consciously, to see images without obscurity, without filters, you have to awaken consciousness in the internal worlds, in the astral and mental planes. Not easy. We're very asleep. I've met many Gnostics who think they have conscious imagination. And they show that they think that because everything that they imagine, they think is real and true. They think that their visions and their dreams always reflect perfect truth. So they go around talking about their dreams. I dreamed this, I dreamed that, as if it's really true. And they're deceiving themselves more than anyone. The Master Samael said very clearly in the fundamental notions of endocrinology and criminology, every vision must be fully and completely supported by concrete facts in the physical world. If your vision, if your images are not supported by the facts, don't believe it. Test it. Because we have a lot of ego, and the ego is what we usually see through. That's what these other three types of imagination are. Unconscious, subconscious, and infraconscious. These are images of those levels of our mind. Unconscious are all the images, the egos, the projections, the entities in our mind that we've created unconsciously. The subconscious are all those that are below our knowledge, underneath our consciousness. We have no clue that it's there. The infraconscious is the deepest. If you've ever once had a nightmare, you have seen your infraconsciousness. Nightmares are experiences in the infraconsciousness. So we need to study from moment to moment what images we see continually in the mind. Not just in meditation, but throughout the day. What images are we creating? What are we projecting? What are we fantasizing? What are we imagining? And if you think you don't imagine, you better watch yourself closely. To be alive is to imagine. You're just not conscious of it. Consciousness perceives. That is its sole function. To perceive and transmit information. We are constantly using imagination all day long, all night long, constantly using it, but we do it unconsciously, without awareness. So I know many of us think we just go through our day and we do what we have to do. We don't imagine things. We don't daydream. We don't fantasize. You're fooling yourself. Our lives are a continual flow of energy psychologically, and that flow is all perceptible. But you have to look at it to see it. You haven't seen it because you haven't looked. If you start watching yourself, you'll see it, and you will be greatly disturbed. Any questions?
Can you go back to the chart with the different laws?
Trying to. Thing is stubborn. Oh, here we go. Sorry, we have technology issues here. This one. Okay.
So we say that we have egos, and if you look in the mind, 49 different levels of the mind, and then we have here all these different laws. I'm just looking at the chart and kind of thinking, mind, you got 12 laws, and then you have egos also in your emotions and your physical body, and they're all lesser laws than what the egos have. So how does that work out?
Well, the laws that manage the ego are from 96 down to 864. Those are the laws that manage the ego. And those correspond to the 9 levels of the infinite dimensions. Those 9 levels are varying degrees of density. But they don't correspond exactly to what our intellect says are the 49 levels of the mind. In the same way that in your physical body, there are many levels of density, right? If you started to zoom in on your body, you'd pass through the level of molecules, then cells, then atoms, right? Levels of density. This is the same. Levels of density. So don't confuse the laws that modify density with the 49 levels of the mind. The 49 levels are a psychological map, and this is I don't know, they sort of overlay each other is what I'm trying to express. They say the same thing in a different way. Yeah. Any other questions?
The imaginary nation is the same as our psychological country?
The imaginary nation? What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is like everybody has a nation. I said the nation, but in this case, is the imaginary nation. That's a composed word. And we have a psychological country. So is the same?
I would assume. I haven't heard the term imaginary nation, so I'm not exactly sure how you define that. But in the fourth way schools, the term psychological country refers to our inner world, our psychological world, which is a whole world in and of itself. Sometimes we say every head or every mind is a world. And it's true. But that world is completely subjective in us. It's all a projection of our desires and a reflection of our ego. It isn't an objective world. So I would presume that those terms you're expressing would be the same thing. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
How does dhyana, or imagining God, relate to the Dzogchen practice you spoke of last time?
Good question. In the last lecture, I was talking about an exercise that's very similar to Dzogchen teachings, in which the practitioner does not do anything. And the Master Samael explained this practice very clearly in the Christmas message of, I think it was 65, 66, where he explained that to do this practice, one simply observes all the content of the mind. How can you observe something unless you see it? Is the answer. To observe the contents of the mind, to observe a thought, to observe an emotion, or to observe what's happening, one has to see that. Dhyana is a state of absorption of perception. All Dzogchen practices, Mahamudra practices, are built on that foundation. And that's what I was trying to explain with certain groups have this idea that when you sit to meditate, you should reject all perception. You shouldn't see anything. You should just sit. And that mistaken point of view has arisen because those groups lack a master with awakened consciousness. And they're interpreting at the Sutrayana level. They don't understand that the nature of the consciousness is to perceive. And what they need to learn is to perceive internally the same way they're learning to perceive externally. That is, to see with equanimity. To not reject those images. To not avoid them, but to see them as they are. And that's what Samael was explaining, and I tried to talk about in the last lecture, the previous one. We have to learn to see whatever arises with cognizance. This is why he was explaining to not separate between thought and thinker. That separation is an illusion. This idea that I am different from it. At the level of dhyana, that separation or that illusion is precisely what can create identification. It can create a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of the image, of the sensation, of what's seen. It's what has led some to mythomania and others to nihilism, which is a mistaken concept about reality. The true way to see things from that tantric point of view is to have self-cognizance without separation. I know it may sound contradictory. It's something that you have to discover through practice. It's not easy to put in words. Very challenging. Another question?
Could you expand on the relationship between ethics and posture?
The first two stages of Patanjali's yoga, the first one is yama and niyama, which basically means things you should do and things you should not do. The second stage, he explains, is asana, or posture. And this is the state of the body. In the Gnostic tradition, we take that and understand asana is not merely related to physical matter, but related to all three brains. The physical body is only an expression of what's going on in the mind. What this means is that if your mind is agitated, you can't relax. That's why so many people are taking sleeping pills or drinking alcohol or watching television, because they say they need to relax. The truth is, those are all drugs. They are drugs that hypnotize the consciousness. They are drugs that modify the consciousness. And yes, I said television is a drug, because it is. It is an addiction that harms the consciousness, because we sit in front of it and become fully identified, absorbed. We forget ourselves. So the relationship between ethics and posture is precisely that. Our ethics are what we should and should not do. If we are doing things that are harmful to consciousness or that modify consciousness, then we can never have a posture that will support meditation practice. For example, if we're always engaging in negative action, whether that's physical or psychological, we are initiating streams of energy that are dispersed and harmful. So if we're always angry, then we're filled with angry energy in the mind. That angry energy affects the body. It taxes the body. The body then can't relax because we're tense, we're angry. If we're always envious, not satisfied with what we have in life, and we want what others have, we will also be tense. We can't relax. We're not happy with what we have. We want more. We can't relax. If we're always afraid, if we always want more money, if we always want more respect, or if we're trying to avoid something, these all produce tension. They produce energy that moves through our physical body, which means we can't relax. It's energy in our emotional body, which means we can't relax. It's energy in our mental body, which means we can't relax. I stated in another course that the vast majority of people who try to learn meditation fail on steps 1 and 2. The vast majority. I would say in the 90 percentile or higher. Firstly, because they will not change their habits. The yama and niyama, the ethics. They simply refuse to change habits, which means they can't relax. They can't adopt a good posture. So as much as they try to meditate, they can never relax, which means they can't concentrate, they can't have a serene mind, and they can never have an experience. Simply because they're attached to psychological addictions. It might be drugs or alcohol or sex, but it's also addictions to pride, to envy, to gluttony, to greed, to avarice, to fear. Yes, we are all addicted to egoic states. That's why we get stagnant in our spiritual work. We get addicted to egos. We don't want to let go of them. Another question?
Yeah. Student says, doesn't understand what is meant by we're imagining all the time, 24/7. Aren't we perceiving as a consciousness?
The question is about what I said about imagining all the time, and it says, aren't we perceiving as a consciousness? All of our perception is modified according to our willpower. If our will is trapped in the need to please others, then everything we see will be in accordance to that will, whether that perception is external or internal. So whatever we experience, we will interpret according to that desire, to be accepted, to be praised by others. This means when somebody says something and we hear those words come in, we use our imagination to figure out what it means, don't we? Don't we all use our imagination to say, maybe he means this and maybe he means that? And what if I say this and what if I say that? That's all imagination. Or if someone says, for example, if it's another characteristic, let's say we're hungry, and our coworker says, I found the best burrito place in the whole world. Let's go for lunch. Well, it's only 9:30 or 10. We start imagining, wow, those must be really good burritos. And we start building, in our imagination, many scenarios, scenes about how good the burrito looks, how it smells, how they serve it, what it tastes like. And we can do this for hours using imagination. Now, you all know that once you go there, it never matches what you imagined, ever. Unless your friend said, the place is okay. Then we don't build a big impression. We go there, and if it's good, we're happy. Right? This is how we use imagination all the time, constantly, with everything. That is why we are fully identified, absorbed. Make sense? It's the polar opposite of dhyana. It is using imagination to the ego. Another question?
Yeah. Can you say a little more about the sensation of contemplation?
The sensation of contemplation is a little hard to explain. It is a sensation of consciousness in which consciousness is steady, established, firm, aware of itself. You have to experience that to understand that. It's not a physical sensation. It's not even what I would call a psychological sensation because it's not a thought or a feeling emotionally. It is a feeling of consciousness. That sensation of contemplation can happen anytime. Usually students begin to experience it when they've been on a retreat or done extensive meditation practice, and then they start to feel it. That's why when you do a serious retreat and you start to feel that, you start to feel really happy. Natural happiness. Not attached to anything, but very relaxed, focused, serene. That is where that sensation of contemplation starts to emerge. And if you were to go further in your meditation, that would strengthen. But when we're in daily life in cities and towns, it's very hard to experience that because we're so distracted, very identified. Another question?
Yeah, we'd like to wish everybody a happy first day of the 50th year of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just entered the new year of Aquarius, so Happy New Year for that. No, 50th, okay. They want me to say 50th. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.